Okay, isn't Christopher Cabaldon amazing? I just enjoyed that so much. And it brought me back to the importance of local government. And Jerry Brown, a long time ago, recognized that and established a local government commission made up of elected officials that were the progressives in California, and elevated and assisted them, and turned that into a nonprofit a while back, and it became the Local Government Commission. And recently, after my retirement, we had Bernadette Austin, who is going to be the moderator for this panel, come in and head up that effort, and now it's called CivicWell. I think it's a really exciting, important effort, and she is very much up to the job. She started with the university and actually built a lot of housing and financed housing as part of her job with the university, which is pretty incredible. So Bernadette must be here somewhere. Where are you?
She's right behind you.
Oh, welcome, Bernadette, and take it on.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Judy. Let's just do a mic check. Is this volume okay for folks? Okay, great. And in just a moment, my fellow speakers will be able to do a mic check too. Just let us know, but politely, maybe a little, thumbs up rather than "we can't hear you." That would be wonderful. So thank you so much for that introduction, Judy, and thank you so much for you all for attending and for having this panel. In just a moment, I'm going to be introducing our speakers. And just as a little bit of framing, we are going to start and end with some remarks that are really grounded in the legislation that we've started talking about today. How did we get here, and really what's in store for us in the coming legislative year? After that, we're going to hear about some of the community and environmental considerations from Asha, and then Lenny's going to talk about some of the public and private sector considerations. So that's just a little bit about what you can expect. So first, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Aaron Vod. He is the Chief of Staff for Assemblymember Damon Connolly from San Rafael. He helps craft, wonderful, yeah, I'm going to tell you all about him, though. That's all. But yes, you're welcome to clap. But maybe when I pause and breathe, that'll be a great time because you'll hear so many more wonderful things about each of our speakers. But yes, Aaron is wonderful. He helps craft and pass legislation with a dedicated focus on environmental and climate issues. Aaron continues to lead on negotiations related to the SB 131 cleanup, which is the subject of today's panel, and to ensure passage of meaningful legislation to protect the environment and environmental justice communities. He holds a Master of Arts in Political Science from CSU Sacramento. And now we can welcome Aaron.
Thank you.
Oh, after that we'll hear, I'll do the bio.
Oh, you want to go?
We'll
Yeah.
turn over, yeah. And then we'll be hearing from Asha after that. Asha Sharma is a state policy manager for our Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, where she develops and manages state policy campaigns driven by community needs and priorities. She has an extensive background in environmental justice, organizing, and agricultural and climate science. She holds a Master's of Science in International Agricultural Development with a concentration of soil science, which she earned right here at Davis. Welcome, Asha. There's some Leadership Council cheerleaders over there, I can tell. And last but certainly not least, Lenny Siegel, who serves as Executive Director at the Center for Public Environmental Oversight, and is a former mayor of Mountain View. We were just talking about how I was texting with my stepmom. He's been my stepmom since the 60s and 70s. So this man has been working hard, doing the work for decades. He is one of the environmental movement's leading experts on military environmental issues, semiconductor industry pollution, and vapor intrusion pathway. And in 2011, the US EPA recognized him as a National Superfund Citizen of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Lenny. So Judy gave a wonderful introduction, and I'll just share some of my own personal insights. I bring a pretty unique professional background that helps me understand the various sides of this issue, and I really want to underscore what Senator Cabaldon said, that it's going to require us to rebuild the coalition to do the things that we want to do. And I think that some of my experience brings that to bear. So I have a lot of experience on the private side. I was an affordable housing developer, and I also currently work with the state's largest ethnic chamber of commerce. On the public side, Christopher Cabaldon appointed me to his planning commission. We did some really amazing things in the city of West Sacramento, and I'm also the president of the California Planning Roundtable, so I am in it deeply when you talk about general plans and zoning, so happy to get really geeky with you all about that. I also co-led a research center here at UC Davis and have worked with a number of environmental justice organizations, and I currently lead an organization that helps local leaders with their environmental goals. So I'm really excited to really dive into today's topic, which is incredibly complex, but I'm excited to brainstorm not just the challenges, but the opportunities that you can hopefully take action from here. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Aaron. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. My name's Aaron. I'm Chief of Staff for Assemblymember Damon Connolly. Our district is the 12th Assembly District, which is Marin County and Southern Sonoma County. I would say my boss, as well as myself, would consider ourselves environmentalists in every sense of the word, not only because of our policy preferences and the issues that we work on, but our values as well. He sends his regrets that he can't be here today. I would have prepped him for this anyway, so we're actually just streamlining by having me come and speak. I am consumed with SB 131 and have been for the past 7 months. I think it's important that we have members like Assemblymember Connolly who do get obsessive about these issues because Mother Nature does not have a lobbyist. It is not profitable to advocate on behalf of the environment. It is very profitable to advocate on the other side, though, as the senator described with what's going on in Solano County and the California Forever project. It's nothing new that CEQA is a scapegoat to explain California's, malaise, particularly when it comes to economic conditions. You all know this better than anyone, especially PCL, since you guys helped create the law, and I've been defending it ever since 1970. Traditionally, this conversation has been centered around CEQA and housing, mainly how its abuse can lead to stalling or killing projects, and thus preventing us from reaching the ultimate goal of living in a Blade Runner-like future. What's new with this conversation, particularly in the context of the last legislative session, though, is we've taken a leap. We've gone from talking about CEQA and housing, which I would say, and my boss would also say, that there's legitimate conversations to be had to prevent CEQA abuse from developing housing. The leap, though, is we've suddenly gone to talking about housing and our affordable housing crisis to CEQA in relation to industrial manufacturing, which has never been discussed in recent memory in the legislature. This is quite a leap. And now more than ever, there's a dedication amongst legislatures, which rightfully so, to address the issue of affordability, particularly with the reelection of Donald Trump and the stagnation and overall decimation of America's working class. There's an urgency to create more good-paying jobs in innovative sectors, such as advanced manufacturing. And I think everyone, and myself included, Assemblymember Connolly and everyone in this room would support creating more blue-collar jobs in California, especially in exciting new fields like advanced manufacturing that may be able to help us reach a future of more sustainability and renewable energy. How we best accomplish that is obviously very much up for debate. I think Assemblymember Connolly and I would humbly suggest that the lack of California's socioeconomic progress and the continued obliteration of America's working class is not, in fact, the fault of environmental regulation. Unfortunately, the philosophy that's taken hold in the state legislature is one that argues that if the state would only unburden private industry from the shackles of things like CEQA, we would somehow excel into a golden age of prosperity. And that brings us to SB 131. So SB 131 was a budget bill. It was signed into law by the governor in June of last year. The bill was quite literally changed in the middle of the night. We went to bed seeing one version of it, and when we woke up, we saw that there was a CEQA exemption for what's considered advanced manufacturing. So what is advanced manufacturing? No, I'm asking you guys, because no one's been able to tell us. I say that because SB 131's definition of advanced manufacturing is so insanely broad that no one, including the bill's supporters, can say with certainty what it applies to and what it does not apply to. And that's largely because due to the constricted time frame from, I assume, in the middle of the night when whoever decided to add this in, they didn't create a new definition of advanced manufacturing. What they use in the bill is a reference to an existing definition of advanced manufacturing, which is about 15 years old. And that definition applies to an existing sales tax exemption program that was created 15 years ago by actually then Senator Padilla, state senator at that time. The definition was given, the definition was written broadly because they wanted to give the state treasurer's office the maximum amount of flexibility to decide what an eligible project would be, which makes sense when you're giving tax incentives to programs and industries that you're trying to attract to California. You don't want to accidentally bar certain types of projects from applying for this incentive. So that's, it makes sense in that context, but it was never meant to apply for the purposes of eliminating environmental review, which will become abundantly clear as I kind of read through what is included in this definition. So under current law, because SB 131 was signed into law, here are the projects that no longer have to go through CEQA. Microelectronics and nanoelectronics, including semiconductors. And I'm going to just like rattle through some risks associated with each of these. Semiconductor facilities utilize hundreds of known carcinogens, mutagens, and reproductive toxins, and are responsible for the creation of 23 active Superfund sites in Santa Clara County. Advanced materials. This is the modification of steel, metals, plastic, and ceramics, usually to make them stronger, which we know can be a significant source of carcinogenic hexavalent chromium and other hazardous pollutants and heavy medical particles linked to asthma and reproductive system damage. Integrated computational materials engineering. This one's my favorite because it actually has nothing to do with manufacturing. This is a type of computer software. Basically, this is a complex modeling system that if you were using this, you could design a project by doing modeling and complex simulations. So what we've done now by including this in the definition of advanced manufacturing is we've exempted from CEQA any project that uses some type of modeling software or simulation software. And you'll find from a quick Google search that the military loves to use this kind of program. And the one example I have is that it's been used successfully to improve the casings that are used for ballistic missiles. So theoretically, if anyone is in the ballistic missiles casing business, you could now be exempted from CEQA. Nanotechnology. This is fairly new and innovative. It's very, very tiny electronics. And only animal testing has been done so far in general to see what kind of impacts it would have, but they have some good data on the toxicological reactions in the lungs that can happen from inhaling nano particles. There's additive manufacturing. This is basically 3D printing, usually with plastics or metals. This releases ultrafine particles and hazardous fumes, including metal powders that cause severe health issues based on exposure and inhalation. Industrial biotechnology. This basically covers anything that uses raw materials to produce industrial-like products through usually fermentation or genetic engineering. So think chemicals, pharmaceuticals, textiles, cosmetics, and also fuel production. So any sort of like biogas, biodiesel, ethanol, that is now exempted from CEQA 2. Hang in. So we're going to get to the really bad stuff now. It gets worse, and it gets worse because of the lack of definition in this next section. So this is, if you look at the definition, would be section B. So basically it says, also after this list, advanced manufacturing is also the following. And I'm just going to summarize these paragraphs. But this is in a nutshell what they say, because the definition is so vague. Any system that advances beyond the current industry standard in the production of materials and products, including improvements in smart or intelligent manufacturing systems. So basically, word for word, it's saying exempted from CEQA is any system that is advancing beyond, system or product that is advancing beyond the industry standard. There's no definition for system, there's no definition for product, and there's no definition for what beyond the industry standard is. As you can imagine, that could literally be literally anything, I think. Sustainable manufacturing systems and manufacturing technologies that minimize the use of resources while maintaining or improving cost and performance. Sustainable manufacturing systems are basically, like Tesla is considered a sustainable company. They do a lot of, I would say, good things to reduce their energy consumption, but blanket exempting them based on some things that they apply in certain areas is probably not the best idea. Any devices or technologies used for renewable electrical generation. This encompasses basically any sort of energy generation, all the way from solar to landfill gas and everything in between. And it also exempts battery storage projects, which, to my understanding, have a proclivity for spontaneously exploding. We also know, so that's the language of the definition, but we also know what projects that the tax exemption program already considers advanced manufacturing, because like I said, this thing has been running for 15 years. Again, this program is meant to incentivize projects, not to eliminate environmental review for them. So there's a doozy of highlights that I'll just say, and shouts out to PCL for putting together this list. It's also a public list that you can find through the state treasurer. But here are some of the projects that are considered advanced manufacturing and thus would be exempt from CEQA under the new, under SB 131. So that includes strip mining, metal shredding, metal smelting, chemical manufacturing, lithium mining, battery cell recycling, think Exide, and munitions and artillery development and testing. The fun new addition, so actually the first project to receive CEQA exemption under the advanced manufacturing definition of SB 131 was a nuclear fusion project. So add nuclear to the list. So in addition to all of these projects being exempt from CEQA, SB 131 also allows them to be built on land with endangered species or endangered habitats. A massive shift away from even where our current housing policy is with streamlining CEQA for housing projects does not include these types of things. And a bill that was passed alongside SB 131, AB 130, which had major CEQA reforms for housing, did not have this type of language. It included habitat and species protections. SB 131 has no typical environmental guardrails as well, like a buffer zone between where a project can be built and a sensitive receptor, such as a school, daycare, hospital, public park, or just a residential community. And lastly, the law has no labor protections for the workers who build or operate these facilities and requires no meaningful public input from the community or tribes. It does not have tribal consultation, which has also been a long-time standard of California. So just in case you were wondering, my boss did not support this bill. But thank you. Yeah, I wish that was applause worthy. If you look up the vote count for this thing, it flew out of both the Assembly and the Senate. And if you know anything about the California legislature, we do have a supermajority of Democrats. So a majority of Democrats supported this bill. PCL knows, Asha knows, we are running around the hall. It was amended, this bill was amended with the advanced manufacturing exemption added before the 72-hour rule, which is basically you cannot amend a bill 72 hours before it's voted on. That's in the Constitution. There's no way around it. So we had 3 days before we had to vote on this. I think we did a good job of organizing members and explaining what the concerns would be of exempting CEQA for advanced manufacturing and, you know, building a metal shredding facility next to a preschool. But it passed with ease. And I think that's largely in part due to the fact that there were promises made to clean up this bill immediately. Those were made both publicly and privately, but that never happened. And I would say the Assembly member and I we were prepared for the scenario that cleanup did not happen. So basically when SB 131 was going through the limited process that it had to go through, we started working on cleanup language with PCL and Asha and Leadership Council and other folks who are in this room. And that became AB 1083. When it was official that the Senate and the Assembly no longer were going to pursue cleanup, we introduced our own bill. We were able to, thank you. We were able to organize 26 co-authors on this, even before its introduction, and that included both Assembly members and senators. We had 150 environmental organizations in support, and we had a strong labor coalition, Labor Fed, machinists, UAW, building trades. And over the interim, because we introduced this at the end of last year's session, it was what's known as a 2-year bill, which puts it on an expedited timeline, and it would have had to pass this last week, or God, it's Saturday. It would have had to pass on Thursday or Monday, and that didn't happen. I'll explain why. We were working over the interim, especially with members of our caucus in the Assembly, to come to some sort of agreement on what language could look like. What AB 1083 did is it eliminated the definition of advanced manufacturing and just created an exemption for semiconductor facilities. The reason being, the only explanation that has ever been given for having the advanced manufacturing CEQA exemption in SB 131 was given in the one hearing that SB 131 received by the author, who said California lost CHIPS money from the federal government because specifically for semiconductor facilities, because our environmental regulations were too burdensome. Whether or not that's true, we took it as face value as a good faith effort to start negotiation. And so we always imagined that there would be stakeholder input and input from other members to come up with some sort of middle ground. We did not receive any input from our more moderate members about how the definition could be narrowed or expanded to a middle ground. Basically, what we heard during this process again and again was that people either supported where we were going with 1083, which was a very restrictive amendment to roll back kind of the most harmful provisions of 131. And that included putting habitat language, environmental guardrails like buffers at 3,200 feet, and labor protections, as well as the major narrowing of the definition. We did not have the time during the interim to reach any sort of consensus. And honestly, I think if 1083 had come to the assembly floor, it would not have passed. So we've been given another opportunity to introduce a new bill to give us more time. That's AB 1553. And we're currently going through those negotiations as well. This is a priority for Assemblymember Connolly. A lot of folks in this room are involved in working on this with me, and we are hoping that we get to a good spot. But I think Senator Cabaldon illustrated this. This is a very moderate legislature. It's the most moderate I've seen in my time working in the legislature, and environmental issues are just not on the minds of legislators in the way that they used to be. So we all really need to work together on this. We'll get to more of it later, but yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So I think this is probably information that you all are probably very aware of, but the California economy grew at least geometrically, if not exponentially, even as we have strong environmental protections. So some of these concerns about that you have cited that have been raised about lack of socioeconomic progress being blamed on environmental regulation is just patently untrue. I'll make another comment that folks are probably aware of too, is that we had flat energy consumption even as the economy grew and even as our population ballooned because of strong environmental efficiency interventions, and it's only now grown largely due to data centers, right? So I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. I also want to make one other point, and that's that the organization I lead, CivicWell, we're a founding member of the California Resilience Partnership, and we often talk about how what we do in California sets the tone for the rest of the nation, because if it can't happen here with our super majority of Democrats and our very strong economy, if we can't make some of these things work here, there really isn't hope in other states or nationally to do things. So there is the work that we do that impacts our communities, but also thinking about how we lead the way nationally and in some cases internationally. And as a way to pivot, we know that employment and economic growth is really a huge concern among communities, but that is by far and away not their only concern. So Asha, if you want to give us a little bit of a perspective on that, that would be great.
Happy to. Hi, everyone. Asha Sharma with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. As mentioned, I'm the state policy manager, so I'm based here in Sacramento. I do a lot of legislative and regulatory advocacy work on behalf of the organization. A little bit more about Leadership Council. We're a community-based environmental justice organization based in the San Joaquin Valley and Eastern Coachella Valley, where we work directly with communities on community-identified priorities. What that means for our state work is we're not working on anything unless it's a clearly defined community priority, which defending CEQA is always a top priority whenever we talk to communities because of the tremendous positive impact that we've seen on the ground because of this law. To give a couple examples, we've utilized CEQA to ensure that development projects, especially industrial development projects, mitigate their harms, that they're transparent about what the environmental impacts and potential public health harms would be and how to potentially mitigate these. With CEQA, we have a public process. A lot of the communities that we work with are lower income, majority communities of color that typically have not had a historic say in what the development in their neighborhoods look like. CEQA is really the only law that we have on the books that ensures that these communities that have historically been excluded from decision-making at all levels of government, local, state, federal, at the very least have a seat at the table and have information that they need to, make decisions about how they want to advocate for what their neighborhoods look like. Through CEQA, we've been able to secure really meaningful mitigations when projects have been proposed in the communities that we work with. Communities have advocated through CEQA in ways that have led to reduced traffic impacts during project construction, which can be significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions and also local air quality impacts, ensuring that truck routes during construction periods, especially for major projects, aren't going by local elementary schools, which can be hazardous for children and also have air quality impacts. CEQA has led to electrification of equipment on site at industrial sites, which also helps reduce air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. We've been able to secure improved fire safety when projects, for instance, include battery storage, as Aaron mentioned. And then reduce dust impacts, which is a big concern for community members that we work with as well, because the dust in those areas can carry diseases like valley fever for folks who are familiar. So we were really concerned when this bill came up last session. As Aaron mentioned, the bill went through a highly unusual process. So bills can go through a policy process. They can also go through the budget process at the state level. When a bill goes through the normal policy process, there's committee hearings. A bill goes to a floor vote. Every legislator gets to vote on the bill. This bill was basically jammed through what we call the budget process, which really reduces the number of decision makers at the table. So it really narrows that group to really, the governor, the pro tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the Assembly, and in this case also the Senate Budget Chair was really involved, Senator Weiner, who, if folks are familiar, he loves to call CEQA Frankenstein law, so not a big fan, and was really trying to push something through the budget this session. So unfortunately, this bill was released what we call on amendment deadline. So basically, by the time the bill was released into the public, after this, group had negotiated what it would include, there is essentially no time to change the bill. We were scrambling. As Aaron mentioned, no one knew what advanced manufacturing really meant. We were looking through government code, trying to figure out, what this could include. And basically the day of, we're learning what semiconductors are, not a commonly used word, I would say, in our everyday life, and really trying to understand the impacts and try to rally as quickly as we could. But really by the time, the bill was out in the world, there was no time to change the contents of it. And because it was through the budget process, and there was actually a piece or a line in the budget bill that basically said if legislators didn't vote yes on this bill, then the whole budget deal would dissolve, which basically means, we're not going to be funding education programs on time. We're not going to be funding essential health care services on time. So there's an immense amount of pressure on legislators to vote yes on this bill. So it takes a lot of bravery for the members who voted no, because there was this, basically almost virtually no option to vote the bill down because of how it was tied to the overall budget deal. But we rallied our troops, so we ended up having a coalition of more than 200 organizations. That's environmental justice organizations, environmental organizations, conservation organizations, labor unions, tribes that strongly oppose this bill. Many folks are in this room. Raise your hand if you're working on 131 cleanup. This is a huge group effort. So just want folks to know, I personally feel a lot of hope just because of how many people are involved in this huge fight. So we really rallied our troops, and all summer we're working with members like Assemblymember Connolly, our other environmental champions in the legislature, to really be pushing for cleanup. As Aaron mentioned, although legislators voted yes on this bill, it was because they were promised cleanup later in the summer, specifically on advanced manufacturing. So they were told, don't worry, we know there's problems with this bill. We had to negotiate it, at the 11th hour, but we're going to come back to at the end of session and fix some of these issues. Specifically, the pro tem at the time committed to fixing the advanced manufacturing exemption, the lack of protections for endangered species habitat that have been mentioned, and the elimination of tribal consultation. Because I know many folks in this room know when you eliminate CEQA, you also eliminate tribal voice and tribal consultation. Unfortunately, cleanup did not happen last summer. I think it probably happened for a number of reasons. A lot of kind of big legislative deals got kicked to the end of session, and this really got deprioritized. I think just given everything else that was up at the end of session last year. But we did have, Assemblymember Connolly introduce a cleanup bill that had strong support from all the groups in the coalition that I just mentioned, so more than 200 organizations, had labor union support as well. Essentially, we all kind of put our support, to this bill to really try to push cleanup early in the session, because every day, that this bill isn't cleaned up, there's a huge risk to the communities that we work with. The CEQA exemption is supposed to only apply on industrial land. There's no definition for that, so it could be light, heavy industrial. Many of the communities that we work with at Leadership Council, that other EJ organizations work with, live directly across the street from industrial sites. So this is frankly not a protection for many communities that, are experiencing the brunt of industrial pollution in California. So we continue to push for cleanup. Unfortunately, AB 1083 was pulled by the Speaker of the Assembly to get more stakeholder perspectives is kind of what we've been told officially. We know the Senate is also working on SB 131 cleanup. So our coalition, again, is really focused on those kind of three top issues that were mentioned because they were clear commitments made to clean up those provisions of the bill. We are coordinating with labor unions. Don't want to speak for them, but they have also amendments that they would like to see to the SB 131 language, which we are supportive of. So we have a very broad coalition of partners and organizations that are weighing in to ensure that we get cleanup on SB 131, because as Senator Cabalda mentioned, there are certain projects where this is literally what we designed CEQA for. Manufacturing 100% falls into that category. It includes things that aren't regulated by any other law, like the use of PFAS that Aaron mentioned. California's been trying to get a law passed on PFAS. We haven't gotten any meaningful legislation. There's no federal, no state regulation on PFAS. But through CEQA, at least you get some information on forever chemicals like PFAS that could, contaminate local drinking water for literal decades to come. We're all collectively as water ratepayers in the state, we're spending billions of dollars in California trying to take PFAS and other contaminants out of drinking water. So these are really, meaningfully impactful projects that can directly harm people's health if they're not getting proper, holistic environmental review. And really, I think at a bare minimum, CEQA is a transparency law, and people deserve to have, transparency around these potentially really harmful impacts and have, the ability to go to that public hearing and make their voice heard and ensure that, local decision makers who are elected by them, can really understand the perspective of the communities, especially those that, are really bearing the brunt of industrial pollution in our state. And I will leave it at that and pass it to Lenny.
Great. Thank you so much, Asha. So Aaron and Asha both talked about how there's some pretty wonky manufacturing concepts. Thankfully, we have someone like Larry who's been working in these spaces and working both in, as an elected leader in Silicon Valley and on topics like semiconductor. So let's hear a little bit from you.
Good afternoon.
Oh, 1 second. There you go.
I'm from Mountain View. When I was mayor in 2018, I spoke at the dedication of a monument at the birthplace of the semiconductor industry in Silicon Valley. It is a silicon atom, and I've been working to clean up this industry since the 1970s. Unfortunately, there aren't very many people in Sacramento who know anything about the semiconductor industry, let alone the pollution that it creates. Title of this talk is Every Click We Make. So most people know if you drive a car with an internal combustion engine that you're polluting. Now, some people say, well, I have to do it anyhow. But you don't necessarily know when you do a Google search, you use ChatGPT, or do anything else on your phone or computer, you're also polluting the environment. And that's becoming a growing threat to our environment just from things that we do on a daily basis. Both the manufacture of semiconductor chips and the operation of data centers, which somehow are being called advanced manufacturing in the legislature, are very dirty resource-gobbling industries. And we need CEQA so that communities are facing the potential construction of such facilities to be able to judge properly and regulate them in a way that protects the environment. Now, at this point, there are very few semiconductor wafer fabrication plants in California. Data centers are growing like weeds throughout the state. And so while the semiconductor plants may not be a big threat by quantity, the data centers are. I'm going to focus on the semiconductor industry because I know more about it. It's been around a lot longer. But some of the things we say about chips are also true for data centers. So as Aaron said, there are a whole bunch of toxic plumes, groundwater plumes in Silicon Valley, not just the 20 to 29 Superfund sites, but dozens of them left over from leaking underground storage tanks way back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Those plumes are still there. We're trying to clean them up. And those plumes are off-gassing TCE into the buildings above them. Ironically, in Mountain View, we use CEQA to protect the people who were moving into housing above those plumes. But that's part of history that many people in Sacramento don't know anything about. It's interesting to hear about California Forever and talking about a foundry. If they were to get any high-tech plants there, that would be California Forever Chemicals. Because the semiconductor industry insists that PFAS, and they use hundreds of them on thousands of ways, are essential to production. And they make a pretty good case for it because they're doing pretty miraculous things. They are building features onto a flake of silicon that measured in billionths of a meter. So it really is hard to change the chemical. So what do you do about it? Well, you should be regulating the discharge and emission of those chemicals. There is no place that I know of in the United States that is regulating the discharge of PFAS in wastewater from semiconductor plants. In fact, there are very few places that are regulating any wastewater discharge. I think 3M in Minnesota is doing that. And barely any place do we even have good monitoring. The monitoring that's done now only captures 40 chemicals out of the thousands of PFAS chemicals that might be used by the industry. So basically, without CEQA, we don't have any information about those discharges either into our surface waters or into our wastewater plants, which in turn discharge them into surface waters or into biosolids, which may be spread on our agricultural lands. Another form of PFAS that is used by actually both by the semiconductor industry and the data center industry are fluoropolymers, kind of like Teflon. These are solids, and they don't come out as much in wastewater. They are a threat to the environment where they're manufactured in places like Parkersburg, West Virginia, the movie Dark Waters, and at the end of life, where if they're burned, they pollute the environment. So they aren't that much of a local threat, but they're an overall threat to the environment. And so I've known for a while that huge amounts of fluoropolymers are being used in chip plants, but now that the data centers are using denser and denser chips and creating more and more heat, they're using cooling systems that are made out of fluoropolymers. And in fact, those cooling systems have refrigerants, which are also PFAS, and they leak into the environment. And of course, the semiconductor plants use the same heat transfer fluids or refrigerants, and those leak into the environment. So you've got piping and the chemicals in the piping, which are dangerous to the environment. How does anybody know about it? Well, you could go digging around in industry publications, but you won't find much about that in any CEQA documentation. Another area where California is actually very good at doing regulation. In the 1980s in Silicon Valley, we developed with our fire chiefs toxic gas ordinances, and now it's state law. We have the California Accidental Release Prevention Program, which is an order of magnitude more protective than federal law. And this requires companies to report the storage of extremely hazardous substances, such as arsine and phosphine, which are essential to semiconductor production. Those are lethal gases. And acid gases, such as hydrogen fluoride and hydrogen chloride. So they're required to report that, and the companies are required to develop risk management plans so that if there is a leak, and there are leaks, can be dealt with not only by the company, but by the first responders. So we regulate that well, except if somebody wants to propose putting a chip plant in your neighborhood without CEQA, you don't know that they're going to be putting lethal gases next to your school. And this is a thing we've been facing in Arizona, where they are building huge chip plants near neighborhoods. And finally, and this is not something I know as much about, but you've probably heard about, semiconductor plants and data centers consume huge quantities of water, electricity, and natural gas. And not only do they consume those, but because their operations depend on continuous operation. If you stop at them, it's like you're baking a cake and you have to stop in the middle. You're making a chip and you stop in the middle, you have to throw everything out. Data centers, you want to be able to go online anytime. So maintaining systems that use huge quantities of energy and water on a continuous basis. That's the kind of information that a city council or any other local land use jurisdiction needs to know when they zone, provide subsidies, or do anything to work with a data center or a chip plant. I must, and of course, one of I should have raised it earlier when we talked about the refrigerants. Semiconductor manufacturers and data centers release large quantities of greenhouse gases into the environment. The fluorinated gases are extremely persistent, forever, and very potent, thousands of times as depleting of causing global warming than carbon dioxide. Well, Mountain View has a pretty good set of goals for reducing our greenhouse gases, not just for the city itself, but for the city, for everybody in the city. Well, if somebody were to put a big data center in Mountain View, it would blow through that target just by itself because of the energy used and because of the refrigerants and process gases from chip makers. These projects would blow through our targets. Well, as somebody who developed our greenhouse gas plan in Mountain View, I'd want to know if Google was actually doing a data center in Mountain View. I think we only have one data center right now. No, I know of two actually. But the kind of things that they're building now are so huge that their greenhouse gas emissions would just blow through our targets. Maybe it would blow through the state's targets if all these things get built. Well, again, CEQA doesn't prevent things from being built, but it provides policymakers, decision makers at the local level with the information they need to know whether there's a fit in their community for these kinds of operations. So CEQA fills a regulatory gap. We've heard from legislators that, well, we have other laws. We have the Clean Water Act, we have the Clean Air Act, we have the accidental release. They probably don't even know about the accidental release program. So they say, we've already got these other laws. Well, we have a Clean Water Act. It doesn't prevent the release of PFAS into our wastewater plants. We have the Clean Air Act. It doesn't prevent the emission of large quantities of fluorinated gases into the upper atmosphere, where it causes global warming, and if it precipitates, it deposits TFA, trifluoroacetic acid, into the environment. So the current laws are good. We've worked for them, but they don't totally do the job. We need CEQA, particularly when we're facing proposals to build new plants. I have no idea whether they want to build semiconductor foundries in Solana County, but somebody should know what's going to be the outcome when they build that stuff. Now, one of the things that we've heard from the legislature, and someone talked about it, that we needed to pull back CEQA because that prevented us getting billions of dollars in money from the federal government to build chip plants. Now, no one's built a large chip plant in California for a long time. There's one in Roseville that's being rebuilt, but wafer fab moved out of the state for a long time. Does that mean that we've lost out on the semiconductor industry? No. The biggest companies in the world in Silicon Valley are designing chips. NVIDIA just announced that they're adding 3,000 employees in a new building. Google, Apple, Intel, they design chips in Silicon Valley, but they're manufactured elsewhere. The economic boom in Silicon Valley, the hiring that we're seeing, is in the semiconductor industry. And so California is benefiting from economically. I won't say that AI is a good thing, but benefiting from this huge investment, but we aren't doing the production here. Now, I can understand, knowing the history of, at least of the Bay Area, that defense manufacturing and auto manufacturing were a ticket to the middle class for blue-collar workers. And you might say, well, maybe that, if they were to do wafer fabs in Silicon Valley again or elsewhere in California, that would enable people to climb to the middle class. Well, the history of this industry is they've relied heavily on women of color, paid very little, and are viciously anti-union. So there's nothing to suggest to me that if we were getting wafer fab here, that it would provide the kind of jobs that the state's looking for. We know they provide jobs for tech professionals. So why is Silicon Valley and extended to San Francisco the global mecca for tech manufacturing? It's not because the offices pollute the environment. The wafer fabs have moved out of California a long time ago, leaving behind the TCE that's polluting the groundwater in my community. The reason that Silicon Valley is, again, the global center. And by the way, there are companies that aren't based in Silicon Valley. If they make semiconductors or design semiconductors, they've got offices in Silicon Valley, like Taiwan Semiconductor, German companies just expanding. So we're providing a lot of jobs, perhaps too many jobs for the housing we've got. The reason that Silicon Valley is the world center of tech is because of the quality of life that we provide. We attract people from all over the world and all over the country to work in Silicon Valley. And that is largely because of the quality of life that we can provide. It's expensive, so that's why it's not a good place to try to bring in factory workers. So we've been talking about CEQA, but I haven't heard people spell it out. It's the California Environmental Quality Act. And the best way to bolster the growth of tech and our tech economy is to provide environmental quality and education that'll continue to bring people to California. We still have got to provide the housing, but again, this is a dirty industry. The idea of exempting it from environmental review so that localities cannot make good decisions about what they want to accept and what they want to regulate and what they want to subsidize doesn't make any sense at all. And it frustrates me that I don't have a chance to bring some of these legislators down to Silicon Valley and show them all the cleanup systems that are between, lying in the middle of Google. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lenny. So to take us home, I'm going to plant a prompt seed for you all to respond to, and then I'll have my moderator let me know how much time we have for questions. It'll probably be in the ballpark of 5 minutes, folks, just a FYI, so we can get ourselves back on track. So I've got a two-part question for you. What is your call to action for these attendees, and what is the cost of inaction? And we'll go in the reverse order. So Larry, what's your call to action? Lenny, what is your call to action, and what happens if we don't take action?
The most obvious thing would be not to exempt the semiconductor industry from CEQA and not to exempt the data center industry from CEQA. But I've been told that's probably not politically practical. So the idea is to build guardrails into the legislation. So, for example, if a semiconductor company wants to be exempt from CEQA, they'd have to provide to the public, anytime they propose a plant, a list of the extremely hazardous chemicals they're going to use. They would commit to using destructive technologies that the Defense Department is subsidizing to treat the PFAS in their wastewater. There are a series of things that would directly address the environmental problems that I'm talking about that could be built into the law. I don't know if the will is there. I don't think the will be there unless we're able to educate the media, the public, and then legislators about how dirty these industries are. And many cities right now, again, we aren't going to see many proposals right now for semiconductor plants, but all over the state there are proposals to build data centers. And the communities that are facing that need that information. There should be something in there which says, if you want to build a data center and you want to be exempted from CEQA, then here's what you have to do. You have to tell us about your consumption of resources. You have to tell us about the hazardous chemicals you plan to use.
Thank you so much. Asha, what's your call to action and your warnings about inaction?
Sure thing. I think we pretty thoroughly covered the warnings of inaction, so I'll focus on the call to action. But if you're here, you might be in close proximity to Sacramento. I would just say, there's a huge coalition of us working on this new exemption for advanced manufacturing, and ensuring that it's as limited as possible and as health protective as possible. So I just really encourage folks to try to get involved. You can reach out to me, find me after, or get in touch with PCL. We have lobby days, we meet with legislators, we have all kinds of ways that you can get involved depending on, your level of availability and what you're interested in. So, just say, folks, come to Sacramento, make your voices heard. Thank you.
All right. Well, Erin, I think I know what your call to action might be, but as someone who works day in, day out at the building, what's your call to action?
Support our bill.
That was really easy.
But also to even get there, because we're in the negotiation phase right now, and legislators are not convinced. I think honestly, the one thing we may have consensus on, even from what I've heard from very moderate members, is making sure data centers are excluded from the advanced manufacturing exemption. So we may have a win there. I don't want to promise anything. Legislators need to hear from everyone.
Yes.
They need to be reminded of this, why it is important. This is becoming clear as more data center projects get built. So we're having senators now who voted for the bill who are being excoriated by their communities because data center projects are being built in their districts, and they're saying, no, we don't have to go through CEQA. You voted for this bill that exempted us. So that'll happen naturally, but we don't want that. That's the consequence of inaction, is that we get to a place where we're reactive instead of proactive. We don't want to wait for the next Exide to happen. We want to deal with this now, and that will take grassroots organizing and talking to legislators to make sure that they know this is a priority.
Great. Thank you so much. How much do we have questions?
Yeah,
or-
let's
all right,
squeeze
5
in a
minutes?
couple of questions here if we
Perfect.
can. Any questions from the peanut gallery? Yes. I'll come get. Oh, you're loud enough.
I'm curious about the legislation from data as far as anything to regulate water or myself as a now kind of I can't off of browsers, like that's how we have our privacy requirements.
So, Erin, you want to take that and sort of repeat her question as you answer?
Yeah, so two-part. Is there any legislation that's going to regulate the electrical and water usage of data centers? And then also, is there any legislation to allow from, I guess, a consumer point of break with if you're using something like Google, that you have the option to not use AI and thus not use like data center usage? So for the latter, no, that's like really complicated. I don't know how we would do that, and it would probably have to happen from a federal level, but there is, so in AB 1083 and now in our subsequent cleanup bill, one of the environmental guardrails that we have consensus on from our fellow members is having a guardrail that says the project can't, what is it? Affect reliability of affect the reliability of electrical and water systems in the region. So it's aimed at data centers and making sure that even if they do go through CEQA, that the project is not going to negatively impact electrical and water usage for residential type consumers in those communities.
Great, thank you. I see on the right.
Another
side.
question?
Oh, yeah,
Over here?
Lenny's
Okay.
going to
Yeah,
probably
I just want to add something, and it's not a CEQA issue, but it sure would be nice that every time you used energy that way, that there was, Google or whoever gave you some, you've just used so much electricity or released so much greenhouse gas into the environment. And it's small each time you do it, but it adds up.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anaí Quiroz, and I am a student at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, and I'm studying climate justice and faith. And in October, I attended a workshop where they taught me how to eliminate an AI search. So when you do your search, you have to do -1, and then it'll eliminate the search. And you can look up Reverend Michael and Reverend Dr. Aby's book, Building a Moral Economy, Climate Justice, Climate Hope. I think they talk about it.
Excellent.
I love when
What a simple
we
solution.
are really sharing information here. Thank you.
-1. That's it.
Perfect. One more question over there.
Hi, thank you. This panel's awesome. I'm Laura with Save the Bay, and Save the Bay did support AB 1083, and we were just kind of loosely involved and focused on our regional stories. And from the outside, it looked like it had so much support. I mean, it had so much legislative support. We didn't really know of, there were very few specific entities that seemed to come out and oppose it. So could we learn a little bit more about the pressure to kill that bill and or what the opposition is currently saying, or even, why the assembly, legislators in the assembly, what their concerns are, because it does sound like one of those bills that's somewhat straightforward to some of us.
I think, is that our last
Thank you.
question?
Your question's too rational.
And that's
Okay.
probably our last question, right? Or do we have time for
this
one
will
more?
be the last
Okay.
All
last
right.
question.
So there is immense opposition. It's just not public because these organizations don't need to be public. Basically, they won. The Chamber of Commerce, California Manufacturing and Technology Association, these types of groups that supported this exemption, they won because SB 131 is now law. So they wield the kind of power where they don't need to come to the table and negotiate down from where they got, which is the ultimate goal of having all these projects exempted. And behind the scenes, these are also the types of organizations that are able to just not have to, they can go straight to people like the governor and leadership. And they, I think, are waiting until something becomes somewhat more real, but they are certainly talking to individual members and letting them know, why this bill might be harmful for industry or why we should support the advanced manufacturing exemption. They were certainly in the legislature lobbying members when SB 131 was originally passing, and when subsequently, when cleanup was being considered, they were lobbying to not touch SB 131. So that is there. It just might not be public from the outside. But 1083, I don't, why we didn't have the support we needed within the membership. I really believe that a significant amount of members think that we need to address affordability issue. We just need to unleash the fire hose of economic projects, and one of the barriers to really helping us achieve that next level of progress is CEQA. We would obviously disagree with that, but that is a sentiment that I think is widely or a philosophy that is widely believed in this current legislature, because you have to remember a few years ago we had the biggest changeover. We had 2/3 of the legislature term out, and that was the first class that was elected in 2010 when we changed the term limits through ballot proposition. They all are gone. Those folks were you had a real core of environmentalists who were knowledgeable about CEQA, who remembered these disasters like Exide, you know, and that class is just, they're all gone and they all left at once. And so we have catch up and better work to do to educate the new class of members, like Lenny was saying, on what these projects are, why they are harmful, why we should not be exempting them from CEQA. And in the meantime, hopefully we can educate, but also push members to come to some sort of compromise on cleanup legislation to avert, you know, some of the potentially worse outcomes of SB 131 just being left alone.
Go ahead, Lenny.
So the semiconductor industry worked nationally to exempt CHIPS Act projects from the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a weak version of CEQA. And, but I don't think they paid much attention to CEQA because all of the major location decisions by Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel, Global Foundries, Micron had already been made. They aren't really looking to build wafer fabs, you know, production plants in California. They're perfectly happy to do the professional work here. You know, they have an international division of labor. They do the labor-intensive work in the Far East. They do the chemical-intensive work in other parts of the U.S. And they do the office work here. And I don't think they were a major source of the lobbying effort for this. I think it's other industries taking advantage of the national myths about the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Well, this has been a highly disturbing panel, but also the hope is that the fear can drive the inspiration. You know, we are bombarded daily with concerns, of course, with things like immigration and healthcare. However, just like you all are being pulled in multiple directions, think about how you can use, you know, leverage your voice, the communities you work in and with and for, and your platform to really call your legislators to action to keep their eyes on the prize. So thank you all for joining us today. Another round of applause for our speakers.